Welcome back to the deep dive. We are locking down the controls and setting our coordinates directly into November 2025. We're exploring the enduring, vibrant, and, well, constantly innovating world of the Atari 8-bit computer universe.
It really is a phenomenal time to be tracking this ecosystem. We've collected a very dense stack of sources this month, everything from unexpected corporate announcements and community calendar planning to the deepest, most intricate homebrew projects.
Exactly. We have a lot to unpack. We've got new budget-friendly hardware hitting the streets, massive emulator upgrades, and a legendary developer stepping away, and of course, a fresh tsunami of incredible game releases.
Our mission, as always, is to tear into this material and just extract the absolute most valuable nuggets for you. This deep dive is intentionally crafted to give you Atari 8-bit excitement on your commute around 20 to 30 minutes of depth.
And what's consistently fascinating as we look through all this November data is this continuous feedback loop between history and, modern innovation.
How do you mean?
Well, we see pure preservation efforts like, say, accurate printer emulation and Altera driving totally new use cases. And we see old languages being reborn with modern, structured techniques. The community is, it's constantly finding new ways to push this 4-decade-old hardware.
Far beyond what it was ever designed for.
Far beyond.
Okay, so let's start with the context, the big picture, and what the official corporate brand is up to. It's November 2025, and while our hearts are, with the 8-bit machines, the broader Atari Corporation is still making moves.
That's absolutely right. The corporate side launched Atari 50, the Namco Legendary Pack, on November 13th. Now, this isn't an 8-bit release, but it is significant.
Right, because it's bringing classics like Pac-Man and Galaga back under the Atari banner.
Exactly. Even if it's just through licensing for modern consoles, it signals that the brand is committed to leveraging that foundational nostalgia. It keeps the name out there.
I see why that matters. It keeps the Atari name circulating in mainstream conversations, and that might just recruit new people who then discover the vintage platforms we care about.
Precisely. It keeps the flywheel spinning. But while the corporation is focused on, current platforms, the real community energy is looking long-term, specifically planning out 2026. The calendar is already filling up with VCF events, the Vintage Computer Federation.
All across North America.
Yeah.
This commitment is, it's proof that this scene is not some temporary trend that's going to just dry up.
It is proof of sustainability. We're seeing major organized events scheduled for all of next year. Montreal in January, SoCal in February.
And VCF East in April, right?
Yep. Then the Pacific Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, West, and Midwest, all through the rest of the year. This isn't just a niche group meeting in basements. This is an organized, geographically distributed movement.
And a central part of keeping that incredible flow of information going is the Atari Insights newsletter. The November 2025 issue is live, and it acts as the essential hub for pretty much everything we're about to discuss.
It really is an aggregator for the whole Atari world. This month, the key features include a new joystick workshop series. They're continuing the thinking in code with Basic XL series,
which we'll definitely dissect later.
Oh, for sure. And also an in-depth review of the Apia Pico cart and, perfectly timed, a holiday buyer's guide.
They also include reprints of vintage material, which is always a treat. It often captures that unique emotional connection this machine fosters.
That nostalgia is beautifully captured by one of the reprints this month, a poem called Fred and Me. It really gets to the heart of that loyalty 8-bit users feel, even when faced with faster technology.
Tell us about Fred.
So the author of the poem is praising his 8-bit machine, an XL, XE, or an old 800, which he affectionately calls Fred. He says he acknowledges the speed and fancy dress of the newer 16-bit machines, like the ST, but then he declares, I just can't put away that XL or XE or old 800, Fred, who's been such a friend to me.
Wow. It's a powerful testament, isn't it? The computer wasn't just a tool, it was a companion.
It was. And that loyalty is what fuels this community 40 years later.
I think anyone who grew up with an Atari or a Commodore can relate to that feeling. Speaking of journeys, we have some important news from the hardware scene about a major developer making a change. Longtime innovator Michael St. Pierre announced he's taking a step back from retro computing development.
Michael's work has been so impactful, and his temporary withdrawal definitely leaves a gap. His journey is fascinating. He came back to the scene in 2015 after a really long hiatus and just became incredibly prolific. Before that, his earlier work in the 90s included things like the original Transkey and the Studio 2 video system.
And since 2015, he spent a whole decade innovating for the 8-bit platform. What were his landmark contributions that people rely on today?
The list is extensive, but they all show his focus on integration and eliminating friction points. First, the TransKey 2, or TK2. This solved a huge practical problem.
Failing original keyboards.
Exactly. The TK2 allowed modern, easily available PS2 keyboards to be used seamlessly with the Atari. It literally kept machines alive.
Then he moved into creating these integrated miniature systems.
Yes, the 576 NUC Plus and the NUC Plus 4. And these weren't just simple modern replacements. They were highly integrated powerhouses. The NUC Plus 4 packed in 1088K of RAM, the R-Time 8 battery-backed clock, and multiple drive options like S-Drive or FujiNet, all shrunk down into a tiny case.
That level of integration sounds incredibly convenient, but does that sacrifice the kind of modularity that some vintage purists really cherish?
That's a fair point. It's a classic trade-off in the retro scene, right? Purists want the original look, the ability to swap individual components. But Michael was solving for reliability and maximum power in the smallest footprint. He was building the ultimate portable Atari for today.
And he also tackled a very specific and very annoying problem that plagues a lot of vintage machines.
Yeah.
Analog video noise.
This is a detail only a true enthusiast would obsess over. He found that the standard RAM, the dynamic RAM, and its support circuitry were producing noticeable video noise on his 1200 XL.
So what was the fix?
The solution was the 1200 XL 1mm SRAM upgrade. By swapping the inherently noisier DRAM for faster, less electrically complex SRAM, he completely eliminated the issue. A demonstrably cleaner video output.
That's a huge fix, and the great news is that even though he is stepping away, his legacy continues.
Absolutely. The final piece of his contribution is that he's made the gerbers, the bills of materials, and the firmware freely available. His innovation doesn't stop just because he has. The designs are now community property. That is arguably his most profound parting gift.
Okay, now we transition from a developer stepping back to a piece of hardware that is surging in popularity right now. The A8 Pico card. This tiny cartridge is becoming an indispensable tool.
It is absolutely earning that reputation. The A8 Pico cart is a versatile multi-format cartridge. It handles CAR, ROM, XEX, and critically ATR disk image files. And what makes it so attractive is its affordability. It's much cheaper than some of the high-end multi-carts that run, $50 to $100 plus.
I understand his simplicity is part of his genius. How does the user even load files onto it without needing complex SIO transfers?
That's the elegant part. It uses a modern USB-C connection. You plug the cartridge into any PC, Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever, and it just appears as a 15 millibaud flash drive.
So you just drag and drop.
Just drag and drop your files onto the drive, disconnect it, and it's ready to boot in your Atari. It completely bypasses the SIO bus for loading files onto the cart itself.
But the real technical breakthrough this month involves its handling of ATR files. The sources highlight a powerful discovery about how it manages DOS and coexistence with other SIO devices.
This is where it gets really interesting for anyone with a complex SIO chain. Historically, if you run modern peripherals like a FujiNet or an Indus GT, they all communicate over SIO and try to be D1, the primary drive.
Which leads to conflicts.
All the time. But the Pico cart does something clever. When it boots an ATR file, that disk image acts as D1 internally to the Atari system through the cartridge port. It's not using the SIO bus at all.
That makes perfect sense. So the SIO bus is completely clear. The external devices aren't fighting the cartridge for that D1 designation.
Exactly. The source notes that this frees up the FujiNet or an Indus GT or a real floppy drive to just respond as D2, D3, and so on. No address conflict. They aren't fighting for the same lane anymore.
That dynamic coexistence opens up huge practical possibilities, doesn't it? For portability, development, educational settings.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the workflow. The source gives a perfect example. A user wrote a simple basic program like 10print Hello Universe and saved it to the D1 disk image running on the physical Pico cart. Then they just ejected the cartridge, plugged it into their PC, and loaded that exact same program directly into the Altera emulator.
It's like a modern-day floppy disk that bridges real hardware and emulation instantly.
That's exactly what it is, a phenomenal use case. Now, you should know there are a few compatibility notes.
Right, for the older systems.
Yes, it was designed for the XLXE series. Some users with standard 400s or 800s, even with 48K RAM, have seen some intermittent lockups. And on the software side, it doesn't currently play well with Spartados 3.2, though it's fine with standard Atari DOS, MyDOS, and DOS XL.
Okay, moving on to another cool piece of modern utility hardware.
Yep.
The eCar 6 key programmable keypad. This is being called the Atari Stream Deck.
And it directly addresses what I call retro friction, the annoyance of repetitive tasks or complex key combos. Like hitting Starter All plus Alt plus Shift plus W in Altera just for warp speed, or managing the Start Select Option dance on an Atari 400 Mini.
This little 6-key device just fixes all that with one press.
Precisely. It's a small USB keypad with 6 tactile programmable keys, but its real power is its multiple customizable banks or profiles. You program the complex sequences once, and they're saved right to its non-volatile memory.
So you could have Bank 1 for Altera and Bank 2 for your Atari 400 Mini.
That's the power of it. For Altera, Bank 1 could be warp speed, soft reset, hard reset, start, options, select. Then you tap a key to switch to Bank 2, which could handle save snapshot, load snapshot, and maybe a specific mapping for a game.
Okay, I have to ask. Isn't configuring a super customizable profile on a modern PC to simplify inputs on a vintage machine? Isn't that a little bit against the purest spirit of the 8-bit machine?
That's a wonderful question, and I think it speaks to the philosophy of modern retro computing. It might be against the 1985 experience, but it's entirely practical for the 2025 experience. The goal today is maximum enjoyment with minimal frustration. If a modern tool removes that barrier to entry and lets you focus on the vintage software, it's serving the goal of preservation and usability. It's using the best of the present to preserve the best of the past.
I'm convinced. And the customization extends to the visuals too, right?
Yes, the visual indicators are excellent. The user configured their banks to change color, green for the first, blue for the second, red for the third, and they added a subtle breathing effect, a neat visual cue that tells you which profile is active.
Now, let's quickly contrast these very modern solutions with a piece of classic high-end hardware.
The ICD Multi-IO board.
This board is a crucial historical reference point. While modern things like Fujinet focus on networking and SD cards, the ICD Multi-IO was the ultimate professional expansion of its era. It had a standard serial port for printers and modems, a printer buffer, and the feature that set it apart, the hard disk interface.
And this interface allowed for storage capacity that was, by 1980 standards, absolutely monumental.
Monumental is the right word. It supported SASI or XESI hard disk controllers. The software let you define drives D1 through D8, and the documentation proudly noted that Spartados could support partitions up to 16 megabytes per drive.
We need to put that 16 megabyte into context. Why was that so revolutionary?
Well, think about a standard floppy disk. It held 90 kilobytes. A double-sided disk was 180 kb. A single 16 megabyte partition could hold the equivalent of almost 180 standard floppy disks. And accessing it was orders of magnitude faster. This wasn't just a convenience. It transformed the 8-bit Atari into a legitimate high-end business machine. Let's pivot to programming. The source material suggests that if you're a learner, you should skip standard Atari Basic entirely and go straight to OSS Basic XLXE.
Standard Atari Basic is iconic, but Basic XLXE is called the ultimate environment, for a very good reason. It introduced programming elements that forced users into cleaner, more modern code practices.
What specifically made it so much better? Give us the programming depth.
It fundamentally solved unstructured flow control. In Standard Basic, complex logic was just a chain of if-then statements with goto jumps. It gets messy fast. Basic XL, however, gave you the if.ts, l.dot, and derma structure. It groups the entire true path and false path into one clean, logical block.
So it actively discourages creating that infamous spaghetti code.
Absolutely. And the other major win was for loops. Basic XL provided the while-end-while structure, which eliminates the need for manually setting flags and using JOCO commands to manage conditional loops.
Beyond just code cleanliness, did that translate into a real performance boost?
Yes, and this is the fascinating technical detail. Standard Atari Basic is an interpreted language. Every time it hits a nextT command in a loop, the interpreter has to scan from the beginning of the program to find the matching 4 statements line number.
So every single loop iteration has this massive performance tax just to figure out where to jump next.
Precisely. Basic XL is engineered differently. The interpreter remembers the memory address of the corresponding 4 statement, not the line number, so it does an immediate memory jump. It skips that sequential search tax entirely, bringing its performance in some loops surprisingly close to assembly language speeds.
Let's talk about another language that often gets underestimated, Atari Logo. The Atari Development Digest highlights that it actually teaches core computer science concepts.
Logo is deceptively powerful. It's not just a drawing tool. The article focuses on the concept of predicates, special words ending in P, like equal LP. These commands perform a logic test and return a true or false result, a Boolean value. Exposing kids to Boolean logic in the early 80s was truly pioneering.
And the developer uses a great, simple program to show how Logo connects this high-level logic directly to low-level machine interaction.
The program is called fliptexty, and the logic is elegantly simple. If equal B, peek 755 4, poke 755, 2, poke 755 4. It's brilliant because it uses peek to read the state of the machine and poke to change it based on a logical test.
Okay, let's unpack that. What is memory location 755 doing, and what do the values 2 and 4 represent?
Memory location 755, that's 202 F3 and hex, is one of the crucial shadow registers used by the Antic display chip. It controls things like character inversion. Keek just reads the byte at that address. The values 2 and 4 represent specific bit configurations in that register. By toggling between them with Pokey, you instantly flip the character set from normal to inverse. It's an immediate, satisfying demonstration of controlling the machine's memory map with high-level logic.
That makes it much clearer. It's not just magic numbers. But the article notes that while Logo is great for logic, it hits a wall when you try to make high-speed arcade graphics.
The performance hit is a deep translation tax. Logo was designed to be user-friendly, so it uses a virtual screen with negative coordinates. The Atari hardware, however, only understands positive coordinates.
So every time Logo draws something, the computer has to do heavy calculations to translate.
Exactly. Every single coordinate has to be translated from Logo's virtual space onto the Atari's physical screen memory. For the speed you need in an arcade game, the developer concludes that assembly language is still the only way to go.
Moving from software back to hardware, let's look at the humble 9-pin joystick port. The sources remind us it was designed as a hacker's playground.
The 9-pin joystick port is an incredibly open, accessible interface. The pinout is direct. You've got digital inputs for the 4 directions and trigger, and analog inputs for paddles. But the critical feature for hackers is the direct, uninhibited plus 5V power output and a reliable ground pin.
And reading these inputs is so simple, even in Atari Basic.
Incredibly simple. You use the sec0 function for direction and strig0 for the fire button. It's pure digital logic, easily accessible to a beginner.
That available 5-volt power pin changes everything, though, doesn't it?
It's the key that unlocked early physical computing. Because the port is so open and provides power, hackers realized they could connect almost anything running on 5V logic. Switches, sensors, LEDs, even small relay drivers. This made the Atari 8-bit a foundational system for early robotics and home automation experiments.
We spent a lot of time on new digital solutions, but before we get into the digital frontier, let's appreciate the enduring physical medium, the Atari cartridge.
The Atari 8-bit cartridge is a marvel of resilience. I mean, why do carts like the original Star Raiders last 40-plus years and boot instantly? The answer is simple. They use masked ROM. The data isn't stored magnetically, it's physically etched into the silicon of the chip.
They truly have no moving parts.
None. Coupled with robust plastic cases and solid connectors, they're the ultimate contrast to modern digital media. Flash memory degrades, CDs scratch. Yet this simple slab of plastic and logic from 1980 just works instantly, decade after decade.
But speaking of preservation, the most dynamic effort is happening in the digital realm with the Altera emulator. The recent updates show a staggering commitment to historical accuracy.
The development pace of Altera is just relentless. It's rapidly transforming from a simple emulator into a comprehensive virtual museum of Atari peripherals. They've added full emulation for devices that were once obscure, rare, or just incredibly complex.
Give us the highlights of that new hardware support.
They added full modem emulation for the microbits MPP1000E, the 835 and Pen30 modems. But the biggest challenge is probably the printers and the 850 interface. They added emulation for a whole range of Atari printers, the 820, 825, 1020, and more, and the critical 850 printer port.
Why is emulating the 850 interface such a staggering commitment?
Because the 850 wasn't just a simple pass-through. It was an intelligent I/O processor that converted Atari's SIO signals into standard RS-232 and parallel signals. Emulating it correctly means you can now test and preserve software that relied on those standard ports like old telecom software or print drivers without needing the physical hardware.
And on the hard drive front, mirroring the ICD multi-I/O we talked about, Altair is now embracing mass storage.
Yes, we now have support for the SIDE 3 controller and the Percom AT88 SPD hard drive controllers. For preservationists, this is critical. It ensures that data written for those legacy formats is not lost.
They also dug up support for some real oddities in input devices.
Indeed. 2 very unusual controllers were added, the chalkboard power pad and the stack light pen controller. The power pad was this large, pressure-sensitive matrix used for educational software. Adding support for these niche devices shows the developers are dedicated to documenting every single facet of the ecosystem.
We talked about performance earlier with logo testing. What about CPU speed advancements in Altera?
Altera has long supported the advanced 65C816 processor mode, and they've now added a new option for a 23x multiplier. This means you can run the emulation at up to 7.8 megahertz of phenomenal speed for quickly compiling and debugging large applications.
Finally, let's talk about the new tools aimed at display accuracy and preservation, particularly the palette solver.
This is one of the most sophisticated features in the update. Historically, defining the true Atari colors is impossible because CRTs drift and no two machines look the same. Developers usually rely on standardized NTSC or PAL models, which don't capture the subtle artifacts of a real CRT.
So the palette solver addresses this drift. How does it work?
It works by using a photograph of an original Atari palette image, a reference screen run on a known good vintage machine. The tool analyzes the photo and uses algorithms to derive accurate color parameters for the emulator's palette. It's essentially reverse engineering the precise hue and saturation from a real-world reference.
That's a massive deal. It moves color fidelity from guesswork to an image-based, verifiable reference point.
Exactly. It validates the visual history of the platform, not just the code.
Now we get to the culmination of all this effort. The biggest wave of community activity for November 2025 comes from the sheer number of homebrew game releases dropping into the Atari 8 store.
It is a fire hose of content. We have a compilation that represents 40 years of development and new titles for systems that rarely see releases, like the 5200.
Let's start with the big one, the historical goldmine. The AWA Anthology for the Atari 8-bit and 5200.
This package is a historical masterpiece. It features 14 games based on basic games the developers originally wrote 4 decades ago. They've polished them up and released them on a 512K cartridge, but they also included a special 130K floppy disk.
I love that they included the floppy, and it sounds like Side B is a pure nod to the original development process.
It absolutely is. Side B contains the original basic versions of the games, so you can see exactly how they started. But the real value for any learner or historian is the included 4.5 gigabit thumb drive.
4.5 gigs for 8-bit games. That must be pure documentation.
It's a complete open-source masterclass. It has extensive documentation, the final assembly code, the initial basic source code, and detailed development notes outlining every decision they made over 40 years.
And the decision to bring this to the Atari 5200 is also a huge community service.
Yes. The 5200 is notoriously starved for new titles. Porting these 14 games to the 5200 was a massive boost for that fan base. It's an example of community developers filling the vacuum left by corporate abandonment.
Next up is a technical marvel that spans 2 generations, Mattress Monkeys.
Developed by Matthew Halpern and Zach Scalera, this game is remarkable for its architecture. The cartridge contains both the 2600 version and the 7800 enhanced version, running off a single, shared game code base.
How is that even possible given the vastly different hardware?
It's a testament to highly modular programming. They abstracted the core game logic collision detection, AI, scoring, and made that code universal. The cartridge detects which console it's in and only switches out the hardware-specific routines, like the graphics and sound. It's a powerful lesson in efficient code reuse.
And the game concept itself, monkeys jumping around, came from a surprising place.
Yes, the source mentions the entire concept came from experimenting with the physics needed to simulate the wave motion of a waterbed. It just shows how technical constraints often inspire the most creative game mechanics.
Switching platforms entirely, we have KLAF, which is noted as a truly unique release. The first Intellivision game released through the Atari Age store.
This port is a significant event for cross-platform retro fandom. KLAF is historically important as a precursor to Richard Garriott's Ultima series, and the physical release has amazing new box art by Denny Liu, who actually worked on the original 1980 game.
That connection to the original artist adds so much weight. And there's that great anecdote about securing permission from Richard Garriott, Lord British.
It's the stuff of retro legend. The source says Garriott granted permission for the port because he lived so close to the publisher that the publisher could literally just walk over and ask for the rights.
The shortest path to IP licensing is just being a good neighbor.
Apparently so.
Finally, let's touch on Drone Patrol for the 7800.
This is a robust shooter that originated as an experiment with a parallax scrolling demo. It features a health meter and includes a great bonus mini-game called Drone Bomber, which is a Kaboom clone you can play with a paddle controller.
I noticed the technical collaboration here too.
Yes. The Pokey music was composed by Hexaflight. This just highlights the specialization in the community, where musicians master vintage sound synthesis and collaborate with programmers.
And quickly, we also see Jumping at Shadows and Xenowings for the Jaguar hitting the store, rounding out an incredibly busy November. So if there was ever a month to highlight the dynamism of the Atari 8-bit world, November 2025 is it. We saw an entire spectrum, from new hardware like the Pico card coexisting with decades-old SIO protocols, proving modern solutions can integrate with legacy tech.
We also watched the fundamental language landscape evolve with basic XL reinforcing structured programming, and critically, the preservation efforts through Altera with detailed device emulation and tools like the palette solver ensure that this history is never truly lost.
If you want to keep up with this incredible flow of updates, the Atari Insights newsletter, available via the Atari Basics site, remains the essential hub for all this information.
And that brings us back to the programming threads we discussed. The simple logic of Logo's peak commands and the advanced structure of Basic XL. We've seen that true understanding starts at the lowest level, that memory map. And now that emulators like Altera make low-level experimentation safer and lightning fast, especially with that 6G C816 turbo mode, it raises a question for you, the learner.
What's the challenge for our listener today?
The challenge is this. Should you skip the high-level languages for a moment, install Altera, and start your retro programming journey today by trying a single, simple Pico command, like that Pico key 755 trick to toggle the screen state, just to truly understand the core logic and the memory map of how the Atari machine fundamentally thinks. That direct, instantaneous interaction with the hardware is the absolute foundation of the whole ecosystem. Skip the textbooks, start with a single byte, and see what happens. Good luck, and happy tinkering.